The following may contain offensive language, adult humor, and/or content that some viewers may find offensive. The views and opinions expressed by any one speaker does not explicitly or necessarily reflect or represent those of Mark Radulich or W2M Network. Please listen with caution, or don't listen at all. All right, we are back on the History of Boxing podcast. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And in the opposite corner, ladies and gentlemen, weighing in at a cool 155 pounds, standing at approximately 7 feet tall, and you can't teach that, ladies and gentlemen, Sweeta P, Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
Well, I don't know that I'm ever going to get a more flattering introduction than that. You know, I'd love to be 7 feet tall, and
You can't teach that.
I haven't been 155 pounds since. Let's not even go there.
I see your hot stuff. I see your gym photos on Instagram. You know you're working it.
Yeah, long ways away from 155 pounds, unfortunately. But
Well,
sophomore year in high school is like that for everybody.
It's true. It's true. The freshman 15 years. We are back here on the History of Boxing podcast, and tonight, this was Pat's choice. We kind of kicked things around. I picked some fights. He picked some fights. He picked what I had no idea why I was watching it until I did the research on it. Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez, and what was known as The Fight. All right, Pat. First off, why did you pick this fight in 50 words or less?
We wanted to talk about fights that had some feature of historical importance.
Yes.
Whether it was a great fight or a significant fight or had controversy that a lot of people spoke about. This is definitely about as high as it gets on the controversy list.
Mm-hmm.
We had one of those already with our Bo Galata podcast. This is definitely in that same realm. Received a ton of mainstream sports attention when it happened, the build to it, the aftermath. So I thought this was a good jumping off point to talk about this fight in particular, because I didn't know when we'd get the chance to do it. And it is a real super fight. It's got everything we look for in terms of historically significant fights that we wanted to talk about.
Yep, this is box office all the way around. Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez, billed as The Fight, was a professional boxing match contested on September 10th, 1993. I was a senior. At this point, I had been a senior in high school. For the WBC welterweight title, it was held at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas. Neither one of these guys was the Heartbreak Kid or Sexy Boys, but that's besides the point.
So Pat, they didn't have to pay for the house.
That's right. Bang, bang. You know, I got to ask you, because this fight was actually held at a catchweight. But it was for Pernell Whitaker's title. And my question to you was, why would, just right off the bat, if you're going for Pernell Whitaker's title, why did Whitaker's team agree to the catchweight?
Money. Okay. There's not a lot more to say. This, to put in perspective, this is literally the biggest little fight you could make at the time, with pound for pound number 1 and 2 on everybody's list together, fighting each other. And Whitaker was never a big welterweight. He was quite undersized for the division, as a matter of fact. So making 145 was not really an issue for him. It could have just been a posturing gesture by the Chavez camp to make it seem like they have an edge or what have you. But this was seen as a very easy throwaway giveaway to Chavez for a concession to make this fight happen and make the money happen.
I mean, I get all that. And look, if I'm in Whitaker's camp, I'm agreeing to it too. So this is not me arguing they shouldn't have done it, but it does feel like, I'm fighting for the heavyweight title, but only if we do it at 135. Well, now that's not heavyweight.
Yeah. It's one of those weird negotiating posturing ploys that was just, put out there to get a perceived advantage of some kind for Chavez. Well,
Chavez comes in as the heavier fighter, and he's having to cut less weight. You're considering how this fight's going to end. This whole thing stinks of what else can we do? Sort of shoot Whitaker, from the cheap seats to give Julio Cesar Chavez the advantage. But I'm telling this in memento order. So let's go back to the beginning. Pound for pound, we had the whole gang out. Pound for pound list. Tell me about those, Pat. There's a lot of talk. And this used to happen when we were both in the MMA zone of 401 Mania. Every week, one of the guys would have his, rankings. And then eventually one of the, in the rotation was the pound for pound. Who are the 10 best fighters regardless of weight class? And it's sort of it's an exercise, it's an exercise in thinking about your selected sport. It's a thought exercise is the phrase I was going for. But what else would be the significance of a pound for pound list? And furthermore, since it was used to make both of these guys, they were the 1 and 2 on the pound for pound list, and they decided in one of boxing's rare opportunities to put the number 1 and number 2 best guys in the world against each other, that are close enough in weight that you can do that. It's not like, Tyson Fury and fucking, Chocolito or something like that. These guys are close enough that we can actually do this. Maybe like a Canelo Mayweather kind of a scenario. But what is the usefulness or the significance of a pound for pound? Like, why even bother?
It's one of those things where it helps in many ways to kind of get guys respect who maybe get overlooked because of their size, because of what division they fight in. If they're not, it was always easier for Evander Holyfield to get pressed in the 90s than it was for Ricardo Lopez.
Sure.
Evander being a heavyweight is not always the champion either, versus Lopez, who for seemingly the last 20 some odd fights of his career was either the strawweight world champion or the flyweight world champion, retired undefeated, 49-0-1, with majority of them being knockouts, yet was never the star or commanded the attention that a guy like an Evander Holyfield did. And a lot of that reason being is because the lighter weight classes do get disrespected. And so this is a means to kind of give them their due, as it were, for the good little fighters of the world, as well as the big fighters of the world, if they are of that skill level, to get recognized as not just the best in a division, but talking about, well, who objectively is the best in a sport, where, in a sport like baseball, football, it's a league where everybody competes against everybody, and whoever wins the Super Bowl or World Series is undisputedly your best team at that point.
All right.
You don't have that in boxing because there's no open weight, so this is kind of how it's determined.
So Pernell Whitaker is your welterweight champion. I believe he is the WBC and lineal welterweight champion. But Correct. Who is this man they call Pernell Whitaker?
Are you asking me, or are you being rhetorical?
No, I was asking you.
Okay. So Pernell was a really decorated amateur, fought on the 1984 U.S. Olympic team, which is one of the most celebrated teams in history. Won a gold medal alongside teammates Meldrick Taylor, Mark Breland, Henry Tillman, Terrell Biggs. Holyfield being on that team, won a bronze medal in a controversial decision. Lot of talent on that team that became professional. And for a lot of people, Whitaker was the immediate standout because he was from Norfolk, Virginia. He was small for his stature, but had such an incredible skill set, being a left-handed fighter, being defensively arguably the best fighter we've ever seen in terms of limiting what an opponent can do offensively. And
he really could contort himself almost Gumby-like, and and like Neo in the Matrix, avoid punches to the point where even guys who are like casual boxing fans would be in awe of him. His ability to limit the amount that he got hit while maximizing his ability to hit other people. And while that normally doesn't come across to the layman as particularly entertaining, he was able to do so, and again contort his body in such a way where people were just mesmerized by him.
Yeah, they called it fistic breakdancing, what he would do, because
Mm-hmm.
he could squat so low to get underneath combinations. He could bend at the waist, completely rotate his hip around and bend backwards, and the whole time never lose his balance, not get hit with anything. And as soon as he postured up, rattle off a 3-4 punch combination to an opponent who had no answer for it at that point because they were so off balance, desperately reaching for him.
I was gonna say he had to have mentally broken so many guys in that ring in his career. Just
Oh,
that,
absolutely.
just the like, I'm doing everything right. Why aren't I hitting him?
And that's the thing. He was that good, and it was so effortless to him because this is a guy who, and a lot of people like Mike Tyson who knew him at the Olympic Village, and a lot of his teammates talked about. Pernell won a gold medal when he was out drinking every night and partying every night, and did a lot of that throughout his entire career. And it's one of those demons that'll catch up with him later, unfortunately. But Pernell was just so good, so effortlessly. He was what trainer George Benton called his masterpiece for how much he was able to incorporate and do. And Pernell turned pro as a lightweight. He was undefeated, got his first title shot against Jose Luis Ramirez in Ramirez's adopted home country of France, and was absolutely ripped off on the scorecards. It was one of the worst decisions that people had ever seen to that point. So rather than try to get an immediate rematch with him, his team of main events, the Duva family, they decided they were going to take him in another direction. And he went and fought Greg Haugen for the IBF lightweight title and beat him. He took the WBA title next. And then it was undeniable that him and Ramirez were going to have to fight for this WBC title to determine an undisputed champion. And Pernell just gave him a boxing lesson of boxing lessons. He'll let Ramirez trap him in a corner. And Ramirez is a left-hander too and a great fighter, but he would trap Pernell in a corner. Pernell would literally just give himself enough space because he was such a master at distance to drop, squat down, make Ramirez miss 4 punches, and then come up with a shoe shine combination, bang him on the side of the head, and scoot right out of the corner with, making a show of it, high stepping as he did it. And like you talked about, a lot of people don't necessarily love to watch defensive-minded counterpunchers fight because the perception is they're not there to fight or engage or be exciting. And Whitaker was not just a guy. He wasn't a runner. And that's the thing I think a lot of people didn't maybe have the perception of or whatever. He was standing in front of guys, making them miss and doing this crazy stuff, and then stood in front of them and beat them up as he did it. And he never had a true punch that was a devastating power shot. But what he did have was the ability to walk guys into his shots really effortlessly and could stand flat-footed in front of you, put a really good combination together. And maybe he's not going to knock you out with it or drop you, but he hits hard enough to discourage you from doing anything else. And that's all he needed.
We're going to talk a little bit about the controversy of this fight. And where there's controversy, you can't spell controversy without DONKING. And and sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. Or in this particular case, it's not how good of a boxer you are, but who's your promoter and who's you paying off. Which brings us to Julio Cesar Chavez. But before we do, who was repping Pernell Whitaker, and why couldn't they buy back the people that were bought off by Don King and company?
As much acclaim as Pernell has gotten to this point, he's been the undisputed lightweight champion. He moved up, became junior welterweight champion, beat Rafael Pineda, a great fighter from Colombia. Moved up and won the welterweight title from Buddy McGirt, who was number 3 at the pound-for-pound charts at the time behind Whitaker and Chavez, and moved up to welterweight and took the title from him in Madison Square Garden in a great fight. But Pernell, for this length of time, has been promoted by main events, who are the Duvas, Dino, Kathy, Lou. And unfortunately, they just never were able to muster the same political clout that the top 2 promoters in boxing did, which were at the time Don King Promotions and Top Rank, which was headed by Bob Arum. And even though the Duvas were known, they had a camp, they had a lot of name fighters under their belt, they just never wielded that same political clout, largely to their credit because they really didn't do anything corrupt or silly for the most part. They were actually pretty clean business people, which is why a lot of people did associate with them in the first place.
Well, you know what they say, nice guys finish last.
Unfortunately true. And Lou found that out the hard way, as Lou had kind of been doing this business since, before King or Arum, and had his set way of doing things. And he just kind of had the time passing by a little bit and how business was done with the sanctioning bodies.
So now let's talk about the man standing in the opposite corner, the big cheese, the main event, big star, Julio Cesar Chavez, who has been said to plod across the ring like a tank and hit you like one. This was the classic boxer clubber. This was the guy that can move versus the guy with the knockout power. I mean, it's David and Goliath, but about the same size. It's pretty, like, if you were writing a movie, these are the characters you would write. This was how you would script it. And so Julio Cesar Chavez and Pernell Whitaker, 1 and 2 on the pound for pound list. But who is this man? He said non-rhetorically. Julio Cesar Chavez.
JC Superstar, the Lion of Culiacan, the quintessential Mexican fighter who has that style that is probably what most people think of when they think of what a Mexican fighter is. He comes forward all the time, takes 2 to give 1, works the body, especially with that left hook, has an iron chin and maybe an even more iron will to just continue forward and win and press and fight. And Chavez is the inspiration for so many people. We talked in our last episode about Jose Luis Castillo. This is Castillo's idol. This is the guy he wanted to be and wished he could fight like. And Chavez at this point is number 1 pound for pound for, a lot of people for good reason. He's 87-0, which at this point in boxing,
75 knockouts.
75 knockouts along the way. He's won world championships at 130 pounds, 135 pounds, 140 pounds, just like Whitaker. But now he wants a 4th division, and he's going to try to make history by being the first Mexican to do it in 4 divisions. And he's going to try to do it by making history by beating the other guy at the 1 and 2 pound for pound level that is sitting there right there with him. Chavez, again, a longtime promotional, what you call him, client of Don King, who's after the defeat of Mike Tyson to Buster Douglas. I'm sorry to pour salt in that wound, Mark. I know you hate to hear that a lot. But after Tyson's defeat, King vaulted Chavez to the front of his stable as his guy. And between King's promotion, Showtime showing his fights as main events and pay-per-view headliners, Chavez really became the star of stars and was arguably the biggest little star in boxing for
in 1990
up until the reign of Oscar De La Hoya. Yeah.
I was going to ask you. So in 1993, who's box office at that point? Like at this point in 1993, and I'm asking not rhetorically, but I'm asking for the benefit of the audience, who's box office, because it's important to know why Julio Cesar Chavez was perceived or in reality protected as he was, which again leads into the controversy of this fight. But you need to know then who else is there in comparison? Who's box office in 1993?
Yeah, the boxing landscape in 93 is a little bit different, where the heavyweight division's in such flux because of the breaking of the championships yet again, which is taking some of the luster off. So your biggest stars in the heavyweight division right now, it's a mixture of Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, Riddick Bowe, to a lesser extent, George Foreman, which is largely based around his being a pitchman and commercial star more so than his boxing at this point.
I think also George Foreman was solely holding up HBO boxing on his shoulders.
Well, and then no other real big stars of that weight. You had the emergence of some guys like Roy Jones and James Toney, who were starting to make some noise in middleweight, but they hadn't broken out to that superstar level.
Right.
Chavez is a headliner of his own. Whitaker is a routine fixture on HBO as opposed to Chavez on Showtime at this point in time. And he does fair numbers, but he's not a pay-per-view headliner. And that's why this is taking place under Chavez's, promotional efforts, his promoter in San Antonio, where there's a large Mexican, audience for it.
Right. All right. So let's talk about the negotiations for this fight. This was, again, one of those deals where it's a good fight for Chavez, but his team is looking out for him. And Whitaker isn't the box office that Julio Cesar Chavez is. So when they come to him with all kinds of raw deals, Whitaker's team has to go back and consider, well, do we not take the fight? And then people, if this were 2023, no, they don't take the fight. But they demand more money, and everyone walks away from the table. Then then
rematch clause and this and that, and
then they fight. This would be funny if I could remember the fighter's name. Who did Tyson Fury fight last?
Oh, Deontay Wilder, or no. Not Deontay. Dillian White.
Yeah, and then they fight Dillian White for a third time. Anywho, but no, Pernell Whitaker's team knew that this is where the money is at. But I think also, and this is really the point, do what you have to do. Take whatever stupid deal that you get, whatever gets Julio Chavez in the ring, because we're gonna beat him. And if only we beat him, then we'll be the star. Then we'll be the big cheese. But we gotta get him in the ring. So take whatever stupid deal you're given and get him in the ring and pound the crap out of him. So that being the case, explain for people then what all tall asks Julio Cesar Chavez's team asked of Pernell Whitaker's team.
So there were a few things. This fight, the negotiations for this fight were actually finalized before Whitaker's last fight, before this took place. Mm-hmm. So Whitaker, like we said, had fought Buddy McGirt for the Lineal and WBC welterweight title in Madison Square Garden and won. Whitaker didn't know that his team already finalized the deal for a fight with Chavez before that fight took place. And some of the conditions that were thrown on them was, had Whitaker lost that fight for the welterweight title, they would have fought the fight at 140 pounds for Chavez's title at that weight. Whitaker winning the title meant it would take place at welterweight, so Chavez would have a shot at becoming a 4-division world champion. But also, just as a one-upsmanship, like we mentioned earlier, they're going to make Whitaker weigh 145 or less as opposed to 147.
Right.
Reason being, even though Whitaker was small for that weight, they thought Chavez having to move up to 147, he wasn't quite ready for that yet and physically wasn't going to be at his best. So they wanted to exact their pound or 2 pounds of flesh, as it were, from Pernell to try to perceivably even the odds to them.
Right.
Like we talked about, the locale for the fight, it was going to be in San Antonio, Texas. You know, Texas has never been known for the world's greatest boxing commission or attention to boxing, and hadn't hosted a ton of major fights at this point either. Mm-hmm. So they want to do it there largely because they know Chavez can pack the arena with Mexican and Chicano fans, and they'll largely be in a very pro-Chavez crowd, which can alter and mess with the guy's head during a fight. You know, there's the perception of, oh, well, you know, Pernell maybe might himself have some issues mentally with this because he's already experienced what it's like to go into somebody's perceived hometown and lose when you should have won. So we can get that into his head. And again, like you pointed out, a lot of the thought processes for the team of main events behind Whitaker, doesn't matter. We're going to beat him anyway. Doesn't matter. We're going to beat him anyway because we know we're better and we're going to win this fight. And it's commendable to have that attitude and to believe in your fighter that much. That's a great thing. That's an honestly beautiful thing. But you question how wise it was when we get to the result that we got, and it stings a little bit when you have that go on.
Absolutely. So you're Pernell Whitaker's team. Julio Cesar Chavez's team signs on the dotted line. We've got the place. We've got the date. What's the strategy for Pernell Whitaker to stifle the aggression and power of Julio Cesar Chavez, drag him into deep waters, wear him out, and win the fight? What are they telling Pernell Whitaker?
To understand that a little bit, we have to look at one of Chavez's past fights against Whitaker's teammate, Meldrick Taylor. And I think everybody who's ever watched boxing has heard of or seen at least maybe once the Chavez-Taylor fight and everything that surrounded that, where it was a fight on paper very much like this. You had the aggressive come forward, you know, destroyer in Chavez against the slick, fast, you know, young American challenger or champion in that case, who is going to box and move and, you know, has these fast hands. And what happened with Mel was, as much as Mel was winning that fight, you know, and clearly was, and we'll get into the controversy that surrounded that finish too, but because it plays a part into how this is decided as well. You know, the problem with Mel is that Mel oftentimes stood in front of Chavez too long, and after he lit him up, would take a vicious body shot or maybe a body shot and a head shot. And even though he'd outlanded Chavez 8-2, Chavez was much better equipped to take Mel's firepower than vice versa. And it wore Mel down as that fight went on. And Mel expended so much energy that when he was trying to move away, he was dead tired in the 11th and 12th rounds and got caught up with.
Right.
So for Whitaker, utilize that movement, confuse him, use your fast hands, and outpoint him in that respect. And stand your ground when you have to, but do not just stay there and let Chavez dictate the fight taking place because you think you're beating him through this whole time, when in reality, the guy just has an unreal ability to take punishment and move forward and not be seriously hurt.
Very common among Mexican fighters. That's where we get the phrase like "fight Mexican." You know, you take one to give two. fight in that phone booth. That was what we talked about with the last History of Boxing podcast, the Castillo fight, where neither guy was willing to back down, and they both just stood in front of each other. All Tommy Hearns,
Marvin
Hagler, just no. They forget the second half of boxing. Don't get hit. So
they really do. But again, it's that Mexican. And then if you ever watch a show like Frank Grillo's on Netflix, I forget the name of it, but he goes and trains with Mexican boxers, and there was Fight Quest and Human Weapon, and they go and they train and they learn martial arts. But when they go to learn boxing as a martial art, they go to Mexico. And the reason being is it's not just a sport there; it's a cultural thing. It's a manhood thing for a lot of the Mexican fighters, and that's why they fight the style they fight in. It's a deep dive into a big cultural phenomenon down there. It's pretty cool.
All right, so what are they telling Julio Cesar Chavez? Because in his corner, they're saying, "Hey, we asked them for the sun, the moon, and the stars, and they gave it to us. Clearly, they're pretty confident this guy's going to beat you. He doesn't sit still." He's not going to let you wail on him. This isn't an S&M club. Sorry. Here's me projecting again.
Glimpses at Mark's personal life aside, everybody.
I'm not square. That's a window into my world. No, he's not gonna. This is a guy that it's not going to make you chase him. However, he's going to stand in front of you, and you're not going to hit him because he's made of Swiss cheese. So what are they telling Julio Cesar Chavez in order to counter that and maintain his advantage justly, as opposed to what's going to actually happen?
Well, don't get away from what's worked for you against everybody that you're still going to have to do against Whitaker. You're still going to have to apply forward pressure. You're still going to have to put in body work to lower his activity level. What you have to do is do the stuff on the inside fight. Get the fight to the inside, because you have just a very small reach differential to Whitaker. The size-wise, they really do match up very similarly. So it's not as though he's going to have to try to bore his way in through a long jab or anything like that. It's a matter of pinning Whitaker down in these corners and doing so against an opposite stance opponent, where Chavez's best weapon is his left hook. But a lot of times the left hook is not a weapon so much against the southpaw as it is to move them into position to your right hand. So Chavez needs to win that battle of the outside lead foot so he can keep Whitaker pinned in and find the range for both sides of his hands. He's got to do a lot of pressuring on the inside with his head and shoulders to understand where Whitaker's likely to move, to time it, and to be able to know where he can land shots and pick some shots off. And when he's done punching, he needs to be responsible defensively. He needs to put his hands up and get his guard up, because his head movement is not fast enough to evade a 3 or 4 punch Whitaker combination in full. So he has to have a responsible guard if he's going to stop punching, because as soon as he stops punching, it's very likely Whitaker's either going to be throwing back at him or moving one way or the other to avoid another continuance of that exchange. So forward pressure, cut your ring off, win the outside foot battle, and pick your fighting spots.
So let's talk about the fight itself. And people were really surprised that Julio Cesar Chavez charged across the ring at Pernell Whitaker. I watched this fight today, and I think one of the things that becomes very clear while you're watching it is how, first of all, Pernell Whitaker, I think throughout the majority of the fight, outpunched Julio Cesar Chavez, certainly landed more than Julio Cesar Chavez. Everything you're saying about Pernell Whitaker, in his ability to evade punches while throwing punches, is absolutely true. Also, Pernell Whitaker, constant motion. He was constantly moving around that ring. And not that he was running away from Julio Cesar Chavez, but he was definitely making Julio Cesar Chavez move with him. And you could see Chavez throughout the fight getting frustrated, getting tired. He definitely got in some good shots against Whitaker, but Whitaker took him like a champ, and he gave as good as he got, because Julio Cesar Chavez also takes some pretty good shots. Julio Cesar Chavez in a lot of this fight has that look I've talked about with other fighters, where they're like surprised they got hit as hard as they did. They're like almost like an entitled mentality. And I've talked about that with other fighters too, where it's just like, no, I'm better than this. I'm better than you. How am I getting hit this much? So what are your, I don't want to go too far into it because we have to talk about how this fight ends. So what was your impressions of this fight?
So, and it's not as though Chavez had never fought, a defensive-minded southpaw. He had just fought Hector Camacho 2 years prior to this, who is a very fleet-footed, defensive-minded, left-handed fighter. And Chavez had his way with him for basically, 11 out of 12 rounds in that fight. So it's not as though this style was going to be completely unfamiliar to him.
Right.
It's just a matter of how much Whitaker was able to do once he figured out a lot of what Chavez did successfully through those first 2 rounds. The first 2 rounds, Chavez uncharacteristically is starting very fast. And that's probably because Chavez knows, if I'm going to win this fight, I can't afford to give rounds away, and I need to make a statement early to impose my will on him and not let him get comfortable. Pressure is all about not making the other guy be able to rest or feel good for any kind of length of time, because you want to keep the pressure on, as the name implies. So he tries that very early on. And through those first 2 rounds, they land a comparable number of punches, but Chavez's are clearly the harder ones that land a little bit longer and, a little bit stronger. Once Whitaker sees a lot of what Chavez is doing and is able to analyze it and start making adjustments to it, it's almost as though Chavez doesn't understand how he's able to do the things he's doing. Whitaker, you have an open stance, is what they call it, when a southpaw fighter meets an orthodox fighter. And what Whitaker does a lot of the time is he'll already be advancing to the side and winning the outside foot battle and have his back leg behind him already as he's making his opponent turn, and constantly makes Chavez turn into left hands and counters as Chavez thinks he has him pinned, just because Whitaker's able to get under Chavez's left hook, use his right hand to either jab, parry, or push Chavez in a direction. Chavez has to turn and meet him, and as he turns, he's running into a left hand to his jaw, left hand to his rib cage, left hand to his sternum. And then Whitaker will control again with the right hand. And Whitaker always had this beautiful little chopping right hook that he would throw at like a 3/4 over angle. And when he did that, it lured guys right into either kind of a left hook or left hooker cut. And he would throw that combination so good. And he hit Chavez with a couple of them. And just, Chavez didn't seem to be able to find any kind of rhythm or anything for a few rounds. And after 5 rounds, I had Whitaker ahead 3-2. I think most people watching had some margin similar to that. Like, I could have seen an argument for Whitaker maybe winning the second round as well. But I gave Chavez the first 2 for his aggression, clean punching. And I thought Whitaker really started to run away with it. And then we get to round 6, which is a little bit where a lot of the controversy in this fight starts, because at one point, Whitaker hits Chavez with a low blow. Pretty clean low blow. Like, it landed low. It was there. The referee, Joe Cortez, he doesn't penalize Whitaker because it was the first instance of him catching it. It did not appear intentional to him. And, well, Chavez obviously was hurt by it. He elected to go on, and everything was fine. Now, remember, there was no official point deduction from a referee. A judge is not allowed to become a vigilante on the scorecards and deduct a point for a foul, specifically when that happens and the referee says that's not what we're doing. A judge does not have that authority. The only time a judge can deduct a point is if they feel a round has been so one-sidedly decisive that they'll deduct an extra point and make a round that would normally be 10-9, 10-8.
Which is what I'm wondering. I want to cut in here. So I'm wondering if I want to set this up right. I want to make sure I set this up the right way. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. This thing goes to a majority decision, and it goes like this. Whitaker dominates with his jab, landing 130 to Chavez's face, and in the edge, and overall had 311 punches compared to 220 for Chavez. However, when the fight went to the judges' scorecards, only one judge, Jack Woodruff, had scored the fight in Whitaker's favor, 115 to 113. The other 2 judges, Mickey Vans and Franz Marty, would score the fight even at 115. Okay, 2 things about this, Pat. One, who are these judges, and who are these judges? Who is their daddy, and what do they do? Number 1. And 2, what is the significance of their connection to Don King?
Woodruff has been around for a while. He's an American official. Had done fights in Vegas for the past about 20 years, give or take. So he's known, and a lot of people are aware of who Jack Woodruff is. Did not have any known ties to any promoters by any chance.
And Chavez's team didn't want him.
And that's correct, actually. The Chavez team did object to his being appointed as a judge. At that point, you have Mickey Van, who is an English both referee and judge. Van had refereed and judged a lot of WBC fights. So there was the thought that because Chavez, as a Mexican, was heavily tied into the Mexican-based WBC, and their president Jose Sulaiman had significant ties with Don King. There was a thought that he would not be an unbiased official. Franz Marty of Switzerland, which is supposed to be neutral, was also chosen by the WBC as just an unbiased third official from a country that didn't have a backing of any kind to either fighter or either organization represented in the fight. And there's a reason you don't ever really hear Franz Marty as a judge before or after this, I assure you. And the referee, as we mentioned, was Joe Cortez, who was a Puerto Rican, was a Puerto Rican descent based in the United States, but again, was somebody who was often appointed to WBC title fights and was alleged to have ties to favoring King's fighters.
Right. So this is yet another example of the Daffy Duck boxing match with Elmer Fudd, where everyone's ducks and poor Elmer is outnumbered.
Basically, and 60,000 people in the Alamo Dome, I assure you, were probably not rooting for Pernell Whitaker.
No, sir.
And so we get that majority decision we talk about. Now, Woodruff, who was the one judge that was objected to by the Chavez camp, scored the fight for Whitaker. He scored it 115 to 113. That's a margin of 7 rounds to 5.
Right. And then,
I still think that's way too close for what we saw.
Well, I was going to say, so every scorecard had Whitaker as the clear winner. The AP, Associated Press, 116 to 112. Newsday, former newspaper, 116 to 112. Ring Magazine, 117 to 111. Sports Illustrated, 117 to 111. Washington Post, formerly a newspaper, 115 to 113. I mean, I know, I actually was talking to one of our housemates, Chris, and he made a joke about, this is why we don't fight in Vegas. I mean, it's Texas, but close enough. And his point is that he's making a joke about the common refrain about controversy and bad decisions or paid decisions in boxing. We make the joke all the time. The modern joke is Canelo getting gift decisions against Triple G, and so now every fight is 120 to 0 Canelo.
Canelo,
yeah. But here, and this is what I wanted to get to, if we're giving these judges the benefit of the doubt, let us assume for a moment that judges can't be bought, that integrity is a thing, and
that's asking a lot,
and that Don King doesn't cheat. Come with me to Unicorn Land for just a moment. What is the justification for the judges? Because here's my thought. They're clearly not looking at CompuBox scores. They're not looking at punches landed. They're seemingly favoring perceived damage as having greater value than landed punches. That's the only conceivable argument I can see. Or if we had them here now, why did they judge the fight the way they did, all things being equal? It has to be because they were favoring. Pernell Whitaker looked like he was getting beaten up more so than Julio César Chávez.
I don't even think that's the case, though. I didn't see that. The only thing that you could use to try to justify this is that Chavez constantly pushed forward.
Okay.
And really, even that's a stretch, because there were times where Whitaker actually backed him up in the fight, with combination punching, and it got him to either back off or back straight up because he was actually stung. There were a couple of left hands in there where Whitaker popped him, and Chavez was just totally unexpecting of it, didn't see it coming, and actually would be stunned for a second before, again, coming forward after it. But
we used to have this argument with MMA. I forget what's the phrase.
Diego Sanchez.
Well, just the not the phrase that everyone got.
Effective aggression.
Effective aggression. Yeah. Thank you. I would have been struggling with that. But if you're Diego Sanchez or you're what's the other idiot that was
Leonard Garcia?
Losing? No, but I'm talking about the guy with the carpenter.
Clay Guida.
Clay Guida, yeah. You have these guys who are probably, and I wish Winfrey were here to talk about this for the next 5 hours, but that are like, their perceived advantage is artificially inflated by people who favor movement and aggression higher than anything else, which includes accuracy and, as you said, damage.
But and that's the thing. The boxing scoring criteria has always been mainly broken down into 4 things, with the strongest emphasis being clean, effective punching, and they make that clear. Effective aggression matters, and remember, they put the term in effective aggression. The UFC in their octagon rules just says aggression. So I think they've tried to modify it where they try to say it's, but they always did not. They only said
No, because I
They
remember in the early history of the UFC when I was watching this is post Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner in the Ultimate Fighter. If you were aggressive at all, you got favored.
Yes.
So if you're Diego Sanchez and you're wild swinging and not hitting the broadside of an aircraft carrier,
and Martin Kampman shooting counters up the middle at you the whole time and hitting you, you're still getting credit for stuff. Yeah.
Right, because God forbid you fight off your back foot. You know?
But again, that's the crazy thing too, is as much as Whitaker, we saw Whitaker probably move more in this fight than he does in a lot of his other fights because of the respect level for what Chavez could threaten him with, and
right.
But he didn't. It's not as though he was a runner, refusing to engage, refusing to do a lot of that stuff.
No,
in fact, there were times.
Sniper.
Yeah, and there were times in those clinches on the inside where he bullied Chavez around.
Right.
And he would hold Chavez, hit him twice, and push him off, and do things like that. So if you're looking for a way for the judges to kind of justify what they saw to turn in these scores that they saw, the only thing I could think of that they honestly saw was Chavez walking forward.
Right. All right. So now we've established my defense, and we're doing this in the opposite order that you would do it in a courtroom. Prosecutor, what is your evidence that the fix was in?
A lot of things, but one will point to an argument I never usually use because I usually don't think it's all that accurate, where we go to CompuBox, and CompuBox will tell you that this guy landed 30 more punches in the course of a fight than the other one when it's controversial. Well, what rounds did they land them in? Did they have one round where they really kicked it into gear and outlanded a guy by 20 punches, but then got outlanded in every other round of the fight?
Right.
Things like that happen, and that's not often taken into account with CompuBox, nor is the actual strength of the punch that's being landed a lot of times by CompuBox. If I'm in a right-handed position and I throw an arm punch right hand like that and it taps you on the chin, that counts as a power shot.
Right.
A lot of times that's why I don't necessarily quantify CompuBox as a reasonable argument for who want to fight. But you're also talking in this fight about an issue where one guy landed over 100 more punches than the other, did so at a higher clip of accuracy. On top of that, you're talking about clean, effective punching. Whitaker landed cleaner and more effectively in the majority of the rounds, which should again point to him having the edge on the scorecards, especially with no points being deducted, no knockdowns, things of that nature to alter the scorecards in any way. There are other scoring criteria as well that you have to look into. Now, effective aggression. Well, I don't think either guy was more effectively aggressive than the other, but that happens. But on top of that, you get what we call ring generalship, where it's who controls the fight, where it takes place. And I would say that more often than not, Chavez was not able to catch up to Whitaker, couldn't catch up to Whitaker, and Whitaker dictated where the fight took place, which would give him criteria to win on that part of the scoring. And the last bit of it, which is maybe the most important to Whitaker, is defense. And Whitaker's defense was outstanding in this fight, where he made Chavez miss early and often. And you never saw Chavez consistently find a rhythm for more than a round at a time. I think on my scorecard, I gave Chavez rounds 1, 2, and 12. And I think maybe there's an argument to be made for like the 10th. But I had this fight very wide for Whitaker based on the actual scoring criteria, what I saw. And in any round I thought was even remotely close, it's always the argument of who would you have rather been is the way to go. And I would have much rather been Pernell Whitaker in the majority of these rounds.
The argument is that the fix was in to protect the money fighter. Here's what I'm positing. I'm sure when Don King talked to these guys, I don't think there was ever any like direct collusion. Like, what you need to do, right? And then here's your payola. But there was probably a conversation of, if you don't know which way to go the right way. Wink. But here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm wondering if these two guys knew where they were, saw the crowd that they saw, and just, I'm not sure if you know where I'm going with this, but I think I
do. I think it's the reason why I left before Miguel Cotto's scorecard against Joshua Clottey the day before the Puerto Rican Day Parade was announced in a very closely contested bout.
Yeah, you look around. I've told the story about how I saw Brock Lesnar versus Cain Velasquez in a Lakeland theater, and Lakeland in Florida is in Polk County, and Polk County has a fair amount of Hispanic population, a fairly high Hispanic population. This particular area of Lakeland has a very high Hispanic population. Oh, and guess who showed up to the theater to watch Brock Lesnar versus Cain Velasquez with me and my other white pregnant wife at the time? And when Cain Velasquez made Brock Lesnar breakdance across the cage against his will and finally beat the piss out of him, we had to leave very quickly as there were Mexican people in the theater going, "That's what you get," and pointing at me as if somehow I had lost the fight. So I'm wondering how much of that played into prejudice, bias. There had to have been a degree of anxiety amongst these judges. I think, I just want to kind of wax philosophical for a moment, if you'll indulge me. I think as fans, we look at judges and we assume that they are all knowing, all powerful, completely unbiased, pious figures. They walk with Jesus, and they never make a mistake. But the reality is, and I don't think it has to be as crass and as direct as, here's your money, do the right thing. I think they walked in, looked at that crowd, looked at what was happening in the ring, and thought, he's Julio Cesar Chavez, seems like he's doing a good job. It's the right answer, right, everybody? Please don't key my car. Please don't stab me. And so I think they went in maybe with the best of intentions, and then when they saw what they saw in front of them, they were just like, no, look, Julio Cesar Chavez thinks he's doing a great job. And then they start piling on the excuses and the enabling and all of that.
I don't know that it's the same as, being told to give a speech about the great leader in North Korea and lying through your teeth about how wonderful he is and what a great job he's doing. And, I'll give you 2 points to your point. One, like we spoke about a little earlier, Mickey Van deputized himself to take a point from Pernell Whitaker,
right,
in a round where there should not have been any point deduction on any cards.
Right.
And he took that point based on a foul and scored that round on his card 10-9 for Chavez, meaning he thought the round was even and just deducted that point in order to give the round to Chavez.
Yeah.
His scorecard winds up tallying an even 115 to 115, meaning had he not deputized himself and scored that fight even, Pernell Whitaker would have won the fight by a point on the cards.
Let me tell you something. I used to judge amateur MMA, as people might know. And there were a handful of times where I'm judging each round like I'm supposed to. I'm looking at it, and I like any judge, I think I'm obeying the rules, but I can't escape some of my own prejudices. I remember there were definitely people who did not favor jiu-jitsu, and were definitely favoring the strikers over the grapplers. Then there was me, who gave a round to a guy who fought the entire thing on his back, but because I knew what I was looking at, I gave him the round. And I remember somebody knowing that I did that and was like, are you fucking kidding me? He was like on the ground, like grappling the entire time. And I'm like, yeah, that's mixed martial arts for you. That's jiu-jitsu. Like, he was winning. He was attacking. They were like, no, he was on his back. This isn't amateur wrestling. It's fucking MMA. Like, two different criterias. But there were times where I would be judging and I would score what I think was an accurate score, and then I'd look at and I'd realize that I had scored the fight for probably the wrong fighter, but I did it because I thought that fighter won the rounds. And then I'm looking at my card going, in totem, I'm not entirely sure I could justify this. But somehow or other, these are the conclusions I reached in each individual round. Oh, and boy, did I get argued with at times when I did that. But it happens, and that's what I'm saying here. They might have had the best of intentions. Again, I'm going into defense mode. And I can see your eyes rolling all the way in the back of your head and out your ass. You'll have your say, prosecutor. But my closing statement is, they may have justly scored the cards the way they did and didn't realize they made it a fucking draw until they added it up and went, oh my God, it's a draw. Oh, I couldn't justify this in court, but it's what I've done somehow. That happens. The defense rests.
Okay, so here's the inherent problems with that. One, we already actually saw that Mickey Van deputized himself to take a point where he shouldn't have, and ultimately that point makes the difference.
Okay.
In a fight that would appear to be
You're
so
arguing
one-sided.
you're arguing that's entirely intentional. That he wasn't
Yes.
just doing what he thought was the right thing, and it happened to have benefited
No,
Julio. No,
no,
he's like, I got to
because
get this round to Julio.
yes, because
Okay.
that's a flagrant violation of the rules that you are taught as a judge and as especially when you're a referee under the British Boxing Board of Control, because for a long time the scoring in England was only done by the in-ring referee.
Okay.
So the referee was entirely aware of those rules as well, and that they were the only ones who had the potential to do that. And if you judged world title fights, that's how it has to be. The only point deductions that are warranted without the referee saying so is if a round is so one-sided that you felt you had to take another point based on damage. And
Right.
that's the whole thing. That Mickey Van came out in the fight itself and said that I felt it had to be done, that point needed to be deducted for the low blow because it was so flagrant. He
Right.
doesn't
Even though
have the
that's
authority
not
to
his
do that.
right. That's not his job. That's
Right.
not his job, asshole. His job's not to help you fucking ass out.
Right. Normally in a fight, when you score a draw without any point deductions or anything like that in a 12-round fight, it'll be scored 114 to 114, meaning 6 rounds to 6 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Those judges had 115 to 115 on each of those cards, giving each guy an additional point, meaning each of those judges scored a minimum of 2 rounds even.
Okay.
That's not very common in fights, let alone world title fights of this magnitude.
No, it's not. And again, when I was doing coverage for 401 Mania or when I was judging, I very rarely scored at a draw. I think I did it more often than some of my peers because I think I think, and this was Scott Kachowski's argument back in the day, if you'll remember. He was like, why aren't we doing more draw rounds when they are dead even like that? Why are we contorting ourselves to pick a winner when there is none? It was equal.
Which again, and you know this from amateur judging, you're not necessarily discouraged from scoring a round even,
Mm-hmm.
but you're basically coached to score that round even and even only if there is absolutely no feasible way you could have determined who had any type of advantage in that round. This was not a fight where a lot of these rounds were closely contested. It just wasn't. And the only rounds you could really see arguments for being even were probably rounds 1, 2, and 10 at most. And even in those rounds, I think Chavez had a clear edge in round 1 where Whitaker hardly threw any punches. Round 2, they fought on virtually even terms, so maybe you could score that even. And 10, Chavez came forward a little more, and Whitaker took a lot of the round off, but he still outlanded Chavez and outscored him. So I didn't even really see the argument for that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is going into the fight, the odds finalized at bet time as listing Chavez as a 2-1 favorite. So meaning Whitaker was pretty good size underdog. You're a 2 to give 1 in a fight like that. I'm sure there was probably a lot of money that came in on Whitaker because there were people who knew what Whitaker had to offer, knew the problems he could offer Chavez with his style, and there was the chance he would beat Chavez. And, so there was probably a good amount of money that came in. And it reminds me of a story that Ray Mancini told where Ray came out of retirement to fight Hector Camacho in Reno in 1988. And Ray was a guy who always had friendly ties with certain, ethnic organizations that he shared a background with that might have controlled boxing at certain times in certain areas. And one of the guys after the fight, when Mancini was very well convinced he had won the fight, but ended up losing a split decision. I myself have always scored the fight for Mancini when I watched it by a pretty clear margin. A lot of people felt Ray won. After the fight, Ray said he was approached by one of the guys involved in said organization and told, Ray, you won that fight, but we couldn't let you win it. You were a heavy underdog. There was too much money on you to walk away.
So, in conclusion, it's a majority draw, and everyone just, what was the crowd's reaction to that? That's the part that I didn't watch. It's not really in the notes or anything. I'm just curious, like, they read the scorecards and, everyone in Spanish, ay caramba. Then what happened?
The score for Whitaker was booed by the crowd, naturally.
Sure.
And then the remaining scores, when they were read, they announced, both score the bout 115. So there's a pause because you think 115, somebody's got an edge, to 115, and everybody goes, and largely a boo because it's not even as though Chavez lost. It's just that he didn't win.
Right.
And generally you're never going to be happy with the draw regardless. There should be a winner, there should be a loser.
I'm still sore that the first Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury fight was a draw when it clearly wasn't.
No, it clearly was not a draw, but the rematch did a lot of pay-per-view eyes.
And as Apollo once said to Rocky, there ain't gonna be no rematch here. The Chavez team was like, you know what? We didn't win, but we didn't lose. We're getting out while the getting's good.
Lesson learned.
There were some protestations from Whitaker's group about this that went absolutely nowhere.
Which again, trying to show you the clout that a guy like King has, and the clout that a guy like Dan Duva doesn't have. When he tried based on the grounds that, hey, this judge came out and said that he did this deliberately. That is not allowed within the rules. That point should be ours. The decision should be ours. Nah, doesn't go anywhere.
Okay. Pernell Whitaker, obviously the adopted child of Marvin Hagler, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Not the first time he's been screwed by hometown judging. Talk about that.
Yeah, so we talked about the Jose Luis Ramirez fight earlier. He was not the beneficiary of what should have been a clear decision then. He, in the minds of many, myself included, and pretty much every news outlet that covered this fight, had won this fight very clearly, and yet doesn't get the decision. And his reaction is kind of one of, unfortunately,
yeah, easy come, easy go.
I was going to say, unfortunately, very nonchalant about it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's that Daffy Duck, taint easy. Just like, it is what it is.
And I think part of that is just because he's used to this at this point of how this business works. And he's seen it, not only to himself.
Well, it's funny because I compared him to Marvin Hagler. Marvin Hagler would have set the place on fire with every Mexican in it. Pernell Whitaker is just like, you win some, you lose some. Which,
but I think it's just a lot of that about the perception too. I wouldn't be shocked if before this fight happened, that his team had a talk and was like, "Listen, we can't leave any margin for error here. We have to win every round, or else they're going to screw us." We know that going in, type of thing. I wouldn't be shocked if that was part of the discussion. Told me
you have to knock him out. You're going to have to make him retire on that stool or knock him out cold.
Yeah, but
you're never going to get a decision out of this.
But it's also not a realistic fight plan for these guys either.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't tell him to fight a fight that gives him a greater chance to lose either.
Let me ask you a question. Not knowing that much about Julio Cesar Chavez, he easily cut. And I'm asking because I'm wondering if there was a discussion with Whitaker's team and they're talking strategy. You're not going to knock this guy out, and if you let it go to the judges' scorecards, you're not winning. So make him retire, blind him, cut him, do something where they have to stop the fight.
He's not a bleeder yet. In another couple of years, he'll cut a little more easily. Oscar De La Hoya carves him up pretty good in a fight a few years after this, and he'll suffer cuts here and there. But at this point, he really doesn't have that scar tissue above the eyes that leads to cuts very frequently. Mm-hmm. That type of strategy is not used as often as you think it does because it's not all that easy to cut somebody as much as you might want to believe it. There are guys
who might be an accurate puncher, but you're not always going to get him in the eyes either.
There are guys who are more prone to bleeding, and so it is a realistic possibility. Guys like Mark's personal hero, Chuck Wepner, Arturo Gatti, who is very prone to cutting and swelling due to high cheekbones and lots of scar tissue.
That's got to be a white boy thing because you don't hear it much with the black guys and Mexicans. It's kind of 50-50. But
it's very few.
White guys cut so easily.
Yeah, Marvin Hagler became prone to cuts later in his career. A lot of it has to do with weird stuff like how tight is your skin, how high are your cheekbones, things like that. And how sharp are the ridges of your eyebrow. It's crazy stuff that goes into how that happens. But it's not necessarily a strategic point that a lot of people go to, where it's, okay, we're going to win this fight on cuts because this guy bleeds all the damn time. Or, hey, I saw him cut once. Let's try to make that happen again.
Again, even if you can get his eyes to close up, they're going to stop the fight if he can't see.
Yeah.
Just as Joe Frazier.
Yeah, well, the thing of it with
you're blind, Joe. Fuck that.
I'm still gonna hit him somehow.
This Muslim's not getting out of this ring alive. Easy, Joe.
but it's one of those things where it's you can't, as much as you probably do figure, if we don't knock him out, we're not walking away with this decision. There's also the greater chance that if you're trying to knock Chavez out, you're putting yourself in position to be knocked out, like what unfortunately had happened to them with Meldrick Taylor, where Mel, even though he was winning that fight and even winning it in toe-to-toe exchanges for a lot of it, was getting broken down along the way by Chavez's attack. And even though he still should have won that fight, they should not have stopped that fight. That was ludicrous with 2 seconds left. Why are you stopping a fight? And Mel was ahead on those scorecards. And, that was even a thing where one of the judges they initially wanted for the fight was Jerry Roth, who had Meldrick Taylor winning the fight against Chavez. And they thought he was objected to for that. But had you advised Pernell to go out there and box the best, mistake-free fight he could, even if he doesn't get the decision, if you put on a performance like this, where it's pretty clear to every entity watching that you won this fight, you are, in fact, the best boxer actively in the game right now, regardless of what those judges said, that result is better for him than going in there, fighting a valiant toe-to-toe fight with Chavez and getting knocked out, where you get questioned, how could you fight so stupidly? Why would you try to fight him like that? And, oh, by the way, you also lost, so there's that.
Well, Pernell Whitaker dusts himself off and he wins his next 8 fights. He gets unanimous decisions almost across the board here against Santos Cardona, and all of these he retains the WBC title. He beats Julio Cesar Chavez's body double, Julio Cesar Vasquez, on March 4th, 1995 in New Jersey. By unanimous decision, he wins the WBA super welterweight title. He'll go on in
putting him in a 4th weight division championship.
He'll go on and retain the WBC welterweight title for several more fights against the likes of Gary Jacobs, Jake Rodriguez, and 2 against Wilfredo Rivera, and then finally Diosbel Hurtado. And then he kind of goes out on his sword in the next 4 fights. He loses the WBC welterweight title to Oscar De La Hoya by unanimous decision. Later in the year, he'll have a no contest against Andre Pastreyev. He loses a unanimous decision to Felix Trinidad, and you can kind of see where he's on the way out while some other guys are on the way in. And he goes out with a TKO, like a real man. It says knocked out against Carlos Bojorquez in Caesars Tahoe in Nevada on April 27, 2001.
That was so disappointing because Pernell had been out since basically he lost the fight to Trinidad, which was a lot of people consider that the first true clean loss of his career without controversy. And it was announced he was going to make a comeback, and it was going to be on Friday Night Fights on ESPN. So I remember hearing Pernell Whitaker's back. I gotta watch this. I'm so excited he's back. And I was at a junior high school dance that I left early to go home and watch the fight. And he broke his collarbone sometime in the 4th round and quit on a stool, unfortunately. And that was the last we got of the great Pernell Whitaker.
Ends his career 40 wins, 4 losses, 1 draw, 1 no contest. Julio Cesar Chavez, after this fight with Pernell Whitaker, hang on, where are you? September. Hi. I'm doing a podcast. What are you doing? Around. Oh, okay. Why don't you have pants on? Huh? Why don't you have pants on? Pants on. Do you? Oh.
The views expressed in this show are the.
Where is this fight?
September of 1993.
Thank you. I was way too high. All right, and I was on the wrong place in the list. All right. So he has quite the storied career after this. He TKOs Mike Powell in the 4th round later in the year, and he ends the year with a TKO against Andy Holligan. And then somehow or other, in a split decision, they're not all, so sometimes they get one right. He loses the WBC light welterweight title rather, to Frankie Randall.
Yeah.
And they immediately go, nope, and remake that fight, and he beats him again. He beats him later on May 7th.
He got knocked down for the first time in his career by Frankie Randall in one of those holy shit moments where nobody ever thought Chavez was going to go down. And Frankie was a good fighter. He had been a contender for almost, 8 years at that point, fighting top guys like Edwin Rosario, among others. And he gave Chavez a really good fight and clearly won that fight, even though it was a split decision. Again, with the emphasis being that he actually drops Chavez. And then, of course, because it's the shock of Chavez lost and they're trying to say, he didn't really lose. It was, they immediately go to a rematch where Chavez wins a highly controversial technical decision after the fight is stopped via headbutt cuts and headbutt swelling. And, of course, since that was controversial, Randall doesn't get a rematch for, 12 years.
He'll go on and have TKOs or unanimous decisions over Medrick Taylor, Tony Lopez, Giovanni Parisi, Craig Hawk, David Kamau, and Scott Walker. And then he walks right into a TKO in the 4th round against Oscar De La Hoya. Again, one guy going out, one guy coming up. He shakes it off, gets a couple of, back in the win column wins. And then he goes to a draw with Miguel Gonzalez. That's a split decision. And then he'll fight Oscar De La Hoya and lose yet again for the welterweight title, WBC. Again, he gets some decent fights again, loses to Willie Wise, loses to Costa Zoo for the WBC lightweight title.
Which he was well over the hill by the time he fought Costa Zoo, who was really a Hall of Fame level champion in his prime.
In 2001 through 2005, he'll get some decent wins to kind of keep money flowing in the bank. But then he also goes out on his sword, retired on the stool, 4th round in Phoenix, Arizona against Grover Wiley. And he ended his career with 107 wins, 6 losses, and 2 draws. Not too shabby.
107, 6, and 2. That's not something that's going to be replicated anytime soon.
No, not when you're 50-0 and deciding to call it quits and then fighting Logan Paul. Anyway, so that is the story of Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez, the most contested, controversial, and argued about decision in the history of boxing. And considering I feel like that's all we talk about, that's saying something.
I mean, if it's not number 1, it's top 5. I'll give you that.
For sure. All right. The next 3 history of boxing podcasts we're doing Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Arguello, March 9th. Wow. And March 30th, we're doing one that I picked, which was originally a 2-parter, but then I got social and I had to, reduce the amount of podcasts I was doing. So we're doing one long show. That's good. It's going to be a long one because it's 4 fights. This is the one where Manny Pacquiao fought Juan Manuel Marquez, and in one of those fights gets hit so hard it sounded like he'd been shot with a shotgun. Yikes. These are some brutal fights. Manny Pacquiao, who's I believe he's in the Philippines, like Congress. It's which is a feat in and of itself, regardless of his boxing career. The fact that he still has enough brain power after Juan Marquez hit him with what could only be described as a video game level power punch.
Yeah.
That he was able to retain math, his name, and some memories. All credit in the world to Manny Pacquiao. I don't know what shoe leather he's made of, but he's made of sterner stuff. So we're going to talk all about that. The gunshot heard around the world that some might call a punch.
And aside from that, 3 other fights that were all great in their own right, and shockingly controversial in a couple of them.
Yeah. I think
actually
Manny Pacquiao
all of them.
I was going to say, I think Manny Pacquiao gets some gift decisions along the way here. And then we're doing the Barrera Morales trilogy on April 27th, and then I'll get back with Pat and we'll figure out what we're doing over the summer. So that's
my favorite 3-fight trilogy of all time.
For sure. All right. In the meantime, in between time, I haven't put up the audio for it yet, but sometime this weekend while I'm being social and watching the Super Bowl, I will get up the earlier Resident Alien season, not a cartoon, jerk. I did something else with Alexis today.
I didn't say anything.
We reviewed Resident Alien Season 2, Part 2.
Are there animated portions of it?
No, there were not animated portions of it, you jerk.
Are you sure?
Nope. I mean, like CGI, but like
there you go.
There it is. It's the only thing with CGI. Anyway, the movies that suck and some that don't. Their review this week was You People and Triangle of Sadness, which I highly recommend. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
We reviewed Knock at the Cabin from M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong. And if you don't care about that movie and therefore you don't care about the review, you should still listen to at least the first part of the podcast anyway, where I wrapped Robert Winfrey into the show via the first verses of Straight Outta Compton.
I was going to ask if you sang Batista's theme song because he's.
I did that too. Movie. Oh, I did the whole thing with the gun and everything. Yeah. I walk the zones. Yeah, we decided that he should have like entered the cabin area of the woods from leaving the Punjabi prison.
As long as he would have had the bazooka effect, I'd have been fine with it.
This would have been fantastic. They had him in like jeans and like a button shirt. They should have had him in his Miami Vice suit, his cream Miami Vice suit.
How ill-fitting were these clothes? Since even though he's a lot smaller than his pro wrestling prime, he's still a very large man.
That was one of the. You're not on camera. You got to move closer.
No, I know. I'm actually just admiring who you're talking to.
Oh, he's in New York right now.
Hi.
You live in a house with 6 other people. That tends to happen. Anywho, yeah, we were talking about how like I don't know why you hire Batista and then don't use his size at all in this movie. They might as well.
Talking about Roddy Piper not being shirtless in Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Yeah, it all comes back to Hell Comes to Frogtown and Food for the Snow. Anyway, so yeah, we reviewed Knock at the Cabin earlier this week. We did a page for the Inhumans comic from a ways back, and we kicked off Black History Month with a look back at 90s gangster movies, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, and Juice. To which I have to ask you, Pat, do you have the juice?
Hey, Q. Now I got the juice.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic movie.
Oh my God, Juice is the best.
I gotta say, of those 3, my big one is Juice. So.
Oh, see, I favor Menace to Society, but we all know I'm hardcore. I can take them both on. But I have to say you this other thing about Juice. We did the hoochie coochie. God, fucking stealing that movie.
I love stealing every movie. Sam's, don't you have any respect for yourself?
They used to call me Crazy Joe. Now they can call me Batman.
Which speaking of Crazy Joe and movie triple features, we haven't pinned down a date officially yet, but Ronnie Adams and I are going to help everybody get through the back to school blues with a triple feature, where we look at 3 school movies based on how tough schools got in the late 80s and early 90s. Those 3 movies being The Principal with Jim Belushi and Louis Gossett Jr. and Ray Don Chong, The Substitute with The Substitute with Tom Berenger, which is a personal favorite, and Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer and the all-star soundtrack of Coolio.
That's right, the late Coolio. Very good. I approve. All right, and then finally, this past weekend we did Everyone Loves a Bad Guy Saturdays with Darth Vader, and then Middle Hammer of Doom Sundays, Civil War. This weekend coming up, Pat, do you remember when you and me and the Wobbit Winfrey, we talked Evil Promoters? And we
remember that.
Dana White, Don King, Vince McMahon, Paul Heyman. That was a fun conversation.
Can we still air that? Because I thought we signed some NDAs, or are those all public record now?
They can come after me for the negative $200-$300 that I currently have in my bank account. It's fine. They listen. I ain't got it. What did Rocky say in Rocky 5? Sue me for what? So yes, Everyone Loves a Bad Guy this Sunday. We're looking at Evil Promoters. That's a re-air from 2013. And then back before I was social, back before I was obsessive, when I was just podcasting a little bit, I would still take hiatuses in October for like my brother-in-law's wedding or for Not So Scary Halloween or just because I needed to recharge my batteries. So occasionally I would hand the network over to my pals here and they would do their own thing. And in this particular case, Robert Cooper did a retrospective by himself. He had no guests. Robert Cooper did an entire retrospective on the band Death. And it was like one of the most highly listened to shows of the time. Because again, I go away and that's when people tune in. Take it easy. So that'll be this Sunday. Next week, it's Ant-Man week all week long. We are re-airing Ant-Man Second Chance Man, which is where the infamous Hit It Darren came from. It's fantastic. Please give it a listen. Damn You Hollywood will be on a Monday because I will be with my Valentine on Valentine's Day. Don't assume you know which one.
Never do.
It could be any number of women at this point. But instead, on Monday night, we'll be looking at all 2023 Best Picture nominees. How many of these have you seen? Do you even know what they are?
I don't know what's nominated, so.
All right. Top Gun Maverick.
Saw it.
See if I can do these from memory. Top Gun Maverick. Avatar.
No.
Elvis.
No.
Triangle of Sadness.
No.
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay, now I feel like you're making these things up. No, I did see that.
Tar, or as I like to call it, Bach.
No.
Okay. The Banshees of Ed Sheeran.
Yes, actually.
Okay. Did that one give you an existential crisis too, like it did Winfrey?
No.
Okay.
I know I'm an idiot and stubborn. I know how this works.
I'm the nice one around here. Women talking. I know you didn't see that one. I would if the hottest babe, if Selma Hayek, if whatever you thought was like the hottest woman ever was like, I will go on a date with you, but only to go see women talking, I'm fairly certain you would still push that woman into oncoming traffic.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
All Quiet on the Western Front.
No. Wait, wasn't that? No, I saw the old one, and that sucked too.
Everyone seems to have seen the old one or read the book. And then finally, The Fablemans.
Yeah, all right. I want to watch Spielberg jerk himself off for 2 hours.
Okay, so you've seen like 2 of these, right?
I think that's where we ended up, right? Maverick and Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah. None of the rest.
Two.
All right. Well, I've seen them all. So have Winfrey, and Alexis Hannah was able to not have to see all of them. The deal we made was she could skip some of these, but she has to see all the animated movies and talk about them. She has to do it standing on her head. So
she wasn't going to do that anyway.
Oddly enough, no. So anyway, that's what we got going on next week. We've got a re-airing of our 2015 Ant-Man review, the Everyone Loves a Bad Guy for Ant-Man villains, and then finally, Evan Bevins is back from exile, from my social exile. We are doing a show that we talked about doing last year. I finally got it on the schedule. He gets one show a year now. Comic stripped, I Kill Giants. We're going to read the book. We're going to watch the movie. We're all going to have a gay old time. Speaking of gay old times, what are you doing these days, Sweet Pea?
Oh, is that directed at me?
Yes, sir. Just because you're not on camera doesn't mean I'm not talking to you.
Yeah, I was just making sure. Not a whole heck of a lot. I don't share a house with some mates, so I didn't know if you were talking to somebody else off the green screen, or you have technology and I don't.
Okay.
No, I'm basically do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and have some fun along the way. Like I said, Ronnie and I are going to be planning on doing that triple feature relatively soon, as we can pin down a date. Other than that, I've kind of been watching a little more wrestling lately because I've had time and finding out that I'm a dinosaur and what I look for.
So are you and Gavin ever going to get this podcast you were talking about off the ground?
Again, it's never usually my call. It's more up to Gavin, who says he's busy building a studio at home to really give this a go once he gets through some things like being a dad and house construction. And I'm always willing and up for it, but I have to wait on my co-host, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he's actually making an effort, which I've been saying for 3.5 years now, and I'm sure it's fine.
Okay, then. All right, folks. For Sweet Pea, I'm Mark Radulich. This has been the history of boxing. Come back again and see us sometime, won't you? Be well, be safe, and behave.